right now. As you watch this video, a silent apocalypse is unfolding in the Florida Everglades. We're talking about a $31.5 billion ecosystem that supports millions of people, countless species, and Florida's entire ecological balance. For decades, scientists tried everything to stop the disaster. They spent billions of dollars. They deployed cutting-edge technology. They even turned to robot rabbits and GPS tracking systems. Nothing worked. The crisis only got worse. So when Florida finally announced its controversial solution, people assumed it was just another crazy Florida story. Today, I'm taking you deep into this ecological mystery to reveal what really happened, why it matters to all of us, and what the stunning results mean for the future of wildlife conservation. Let's dive in. Before we can understand why Florida made such a bold move, we need to go back to where this nightmare began. In the early 1990s, this wasn't just any wetland. It was a sprawling paradise of sawgrass, stretching endlessly toward the horizon, broken only by the shimmer of shallow water catching the sunlight. Birds soared overhead in massive flocks. Raccoons scurried through the marshes. Bobcats stalked the edges of the brush with quiet confidence. The Everglades represented one of Earth's last truly wild places. Experts estimated the ecosystem's worth at $31.5 billion each year. It provided flood control for millions of residents, supported a thriving tourism industry, and maintained fisheries that fed countless families. But more than that, it was a living laboratory of biodiversity, home to species found nowhere else on Earth. It started with a storm. In August 1992, Hurricane Andrew tore through southern Florida with devastating force. It flattened entire neighborhoods, ripped through communities, and left a trail of destruction that took years to repair. Among the chaos, a reptile breeding facility near Miami was destroyed. A few exotic snakes had escaped into the surrounding wetlands. At the same time, overwhelmed pet owners across South Florida were making a terrible decision. They were releasing their Burmese pythons into the wild, thinking they were setting them free to live natural lives. Burmese pythons are massive constrictors native to Southeast Asia. People bought them as cute hatchlings, not realizing these snakes could grow over 20 feet long and weigh more than 200 pounds. As the pythons grew larger and more difficult to manage, desperate owners drove to the edge of the Everglades and let them go. It seemed harmless at the time, just a few snakes finding their way into a vast wilderness. For years, no one paid much attention. But the pythons weren't just surviving in the Everglades. They were thriving beyond anyone's wildest nightmares. The environment was perfect for them. The heat and humidity mimicked their native Southeast Asian habitat. The endless supply of prey meant they never went hungry. And most critically, they had no natural predators to keep their population in check. As the years passed, the population exploded in silence. What had started as a few dozen released pets became hundreds, then thousands, then tens of thousands. During mating season, each female python can lay close to 100 eggs. Once hidden in the undergrowth, these eggs hatch into hungry predators, ready to consume everything in their path. They multiply faster than anyone could track or trap. Current estimates suggest anywhere from 100,000 to 300,000 pythons now slither through South Florida's swamps. And those are just estimates. The real number could be even higher. The impact on native wildlife was nothing short of catastrophic. Scientists began documenting devastating population crashes that defied belief. Raccoon populations dropped by 99.3% in some areas. Even marsh rabbits, which had always been a common sight, nearly disappeared completely. Deer sightings fell by more than 90% in python-infested zones. So why exactly were these snakes so unstoppable? Videos began surfacing online that shocked the world. Pythons battling alligators in epic struggles that could last for hours. Unlike their native range in Southeast Asia, where pythons face seasonal challenges and natural predators, Florida offered year-round warmth and an endless buffet. The snakes didn't need to adapt, they simply thrived. And with each passing year, they pushed further north, expanding their range into new territories where native species had no experience dealing with such a formidable predator. For years, Florida officials believed there had to be a way to take back control. Officials opened the gates to hunters, scientists, and anyone brave enough to wade through miles of dangerous swamp in search of the slithering invaders. In 2013, Florida launched the Python Challenge, a 10-day event. Invite people from across the country to hunt pythons in the Everglades, offer cash prizes for the most snakes caught, and generate public awareness about the crisis. Hundreds of participants showed up that first year, armed with snake hooks, GPS devices, and nerves of steel. They trudged through waist-deep water, battled mosquitoes, and searched day and night for their elusive targets. By 2024, the Python Challenge had become an annual spectacle. That year, 857 participants from across the United States and even Canada showed up ready to hunt. They captured 195 Burmese pythons over the course of the competition. Even with nearly 1,000 hunters combing the Everglades for days, they had removed less than 1% of the estimated python population. The state brought in professionals to supplement the volunteer efforts. The South Florida Water Management District hired 24 elite hunters who were paid hourly to stalk the swamps year-round. Still, even with their expertise and dedication, the pythons always seemed one step ahead. Florida tried high-tech solutions next. Engineers designed robotic rabbits that gave off heat signatures and scent trails designed to trick pythons into striking. The idea was brilliant in theory. Lure the snakes out of hiding using artificial prey, then capture them when they revealed themselves. Dog teams were trained to sniff out python scent trails, using their incredible sense of smell to locate snakes hidden in dense vegetation. Drones equipped with thermal imaging cameras hovered above the wetlands, scanning for the heat signatures of large reptiles. Wildlife biologists even attached GPS collars to raccoons and possums, hoping to track where predators might be lurking and concentrating their removal efforts in those areas. One of the boldest experiments involved using scout snakes. Researchers would capture male pythons, fit them with tiny radio transmitters, and release them back into the wild during breeding season. The males would then lead scientists directly to breeding females, which are much larger and produce all those eggs. It was ecological warfare, using the snake's own biology against them. The technique worked to some degree, but it was labor-intensive, expensive, and could only be used during specific times of the year. Since 2017, contractors and hunters have removed over 23,000 pythons from the wild. 23,000 sounds like an enormous number. It represents years of backbreaking work, millions of dollars in funding, and countless hours of effort from dedicated professionals. But experts believe that 23,000 represents less than 1% of the total python population in South Florida. Even the most massive removal campaigns barely made a dent in the overall problem. This growing sense of defeat pushed Florida officials to the edge of desperation. If technology couldn't stop the pythons, if money couldn't solve the problem, if human effort wasn't enough, then what could possibly work? Somewhere in that frustration and helplessness, a wild idea began to take shape. How do you fight an enemy you can't see, can't catch fast enough, and can't kill in sufficient numbers to make a difference? Can you answer this question from the scientists? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Deep in the Everglades, a silent passenger arrived with these invaders, an unseen parasite that's now rewriting the state's ecological story in ways no one anticipated. Its name is Rewrote orientalis, better known as the snake lungworm. And while the pythons grab all the headlines and attention, this microscopic terror is quietly bringing an entirely new kind of chaos to Florida's wildlife. This is the part of the story that truly should scare you. Because unlike the pythons, this threat is invisible, unstoppable, and spreading faster than anyone can track. The lungworm originally came from Asia, tagging along inside the Burmese pythons before they found their way into Florida's wilderness. Once the snakes settled into their new home, the parasite slipped into the local food chain like it had been waiting for this exact opportunity. Here's how it works. First, infected pythons release the parasite's eggs through their droppings into the swamp. Next, cockroaches and other insects feed on the waste, ingesting the microscopic eggs without knowing it. Then lizards, frogs, and small mammals eat those infected insects, becoming carriers themselves. Finally, when native snakes hunt and consume those smaller prey animals, they swallow the real threat without ever seeing it coming. It's a perfect biological trap, and Florida's native snakes walked right into it. Inside a snake's body, the larvae begin their devastating journey. They tunnel through the stomach lining and migrate toward the lungs, where they settle in to grow and feed. For many native snake species, especially smaller ones, this infection is absolutely brutal. The worms feed directly on blood and lung tissue, slowly destroying the organ from the inside. Breathing becomes a struggle. The snake's energy fades as its body fights a losing battle against the invaders. Some snakes simply starve to death because they can no longer hunt effectively. They're too weak, too sick, too damaged to survive. They've found native snakes suffering from severe pneumonia caused by lungworm infections. Some had open lesions in their lungs, visible damage from the parasites burrowing through tissue. In the most extreme cases, scientists discovered dozens of worms, literally crawling out through the snake's mouth, as the infection reached its final fatal stages. The real shock came when scientists began mapping how far the lungworm had spread. 18 native snake species in Florida have already been infected. Let that sink in for a moment. 18 different species, each playing crucial roles in their ecosystems, now carrying a deadly parasite that could wipe out entire populations. The lungworm's reach now stretches through dozens of counties across the state. Some reports document infections as far north as Jacksonville, and even approaching the Panhandle. The pythons may have started this biological invasion, but the lungworm isn't waiting for them anymore. It's moving through Florida's native snake populations on its own, spreading from host to host in an unstoppable wave. But there's one species that's resisting the attack of this parasite. Before that's revealed, if you enjoy this video, make sure to like and subscribe so you never miss the next unbelievable case. And that's the truly terrifying part of this story. When native snakes die, the ecological balance collapses in ways most people never consider. These snakes aren't just background players in the ecosystem. They're essential pest controllers, keeping rodent populations in check. They're prey for larger predators like hawks and bobcats. They're predators themselves, controlling populations of frogs, lizards and insects. Remove them from the equation, and everything shifts. Rodent populations explode, spreading disease and damaging crops. Small predators lose their food sources and decline. Insect populations boom out of control. Scientists fear something even worse. Even if every single python were somehow removed from Florida tomorrow, the lungworm would still remain. It's established itself in native species now. It's reproducing, spreading and thriving completely independent of the pythons that brought it here. Florida isn't just fighting an invasion anymore. It's dealing with a permanent biological change to its ecosystems. The lungworm is here to stay, alive and multiplying in the very species that are supposed to keep Florida's wilderness in balance. The Florida cottonmouth, a native pit viper, seems to resist the parasite's attack. Scientists have documented cottonmouths with lungworm infections that somehow survive and continue functioning normally. No one knows exactly why. Is it genetics? Did they develop some kind of natural immunity over time? Is their diet different in ways that affect the parasite's life cycle? Whatever the reason, it's one of the few hopeful mysteries in an otherwise grim picture. What began as a battle against giant invasive snakes has transformed into something far more complicated and insidious. An invisible invader is now spreading faster than the predator that brought it here. There's no cure, no treatment, and no clear way to stop it. Each infected snake that dies releases more parasites into the environment. Every death leaves the ecosystem weaker and more vulnerable. The cycle continues, accelerating with each passing year. Florida thought it was dealing with a straightforward predator problem. Remove the pythons, restore the balance, and everything goes back to normal. Instead, the state might be watching the slow birth of an entirely new ecological plague, one that could persist for generations, fundamentally altering the biological landscape of the entire southeastern United States. This revelation changed everything about how scientists viewed the crisis. It wasn't enough to just remove pythons anymore. They needed to think bigger, to consider solutions that addressed the entire ecosystem's health. They needed predators that could not only hunt pythons, but also restore the natural balance that had been so thoroughly destroyed. And that's when the truly controversial idea emerged. When the news finally broke, Florida officials stood before cameras and announced they were releasing hundreds of eastern indigo snakes, a native non-venomous species, into the wild to help combat the state's invasive python crisis. The headline alone triggered an immediate firestorm of reaction. Within hours, social media exploded with jokes, memes, and utter disbelief. The comments came fast and furious. Doesn't Florida have enough snakes already? Fighting snakes with more snakes. What could possibly go wrong? People compared it to the infamous mongoose disaster in Hawaii, where an attempt to control rats by introducing mongooses ended up creating an even bigger ecological problem. The mongooses ignored the rats and instead devastated native bird populations, becoming invasive pests themselves. Critics assumed Florida was about to repeat that same catastrophic mistake. For many Floridians already exhausted by the state's reputation for bizarre wildlife decisions, this felt like another episode in a long-running comedy show. News outlets quickly picked up the story, and the frenzy intensified. Some ran headlines that made it sound like a science fiction movie gone wrong. Talk shows turned the announcement into punchlines for their monologues. Late-night comedians had a field day. Anxious residents called into radio stations asking if their pets and children would be safe from these new snake releases. Even some wildlife enthusiasts who generally supported conservation efforts raised their eyebrows, questioning whether the state had completely lost its mind. The skepticism spread faster than the snakes ever could. Why would anyone think adding more serpents was the solution to a snake problem? To the average person watching the news, it felt absolutely absurd. It seemed like a plan doomed to fail before it even started. The optics were terrible. Florida had spent years and millions of dollars trying to kill snakes, and now suddenly they were releasing them. The contradiction was too obvious, too easy to mock. Even some conservationists hesitated to defend the plan publicly, worried about being associated with what looked like an impending disaster. Social media memes flooded the internet. One popular image showed a house on fire with the caption, "Florida's solution, add more fire." Another depicted a person drowning with someone throwing them an anchor labeled "helpful snakes." The mockery was relentless, creative and seemingly endless. Public opinion polls showed that a majority of Floridians opposed the plan, viewing it as wasteful spending on a harebrained scheme that would only make things worse. But here's what almost nobody understood at the time. What few people realized in all that noise and laughter was that the eastern indigo snake wasn't the villain of this story. It had been the missing hero all along. This wasn't some impulsive decision made by desperate bureaucrats throwing ideas at the wall. Behind the headlines and the mockery was decades of careful scientific research, planning and preparation. The eastern indigo snake was once common throughout the southeastern United States. It thrived in the longleaf pine forests, oak hammocks and sandy ridges from Virginia to Mississippi. But this species held something remarkable, something that made it uniquely qualified for the mission ahead. It was nature's own python hunter. The indigo snake eats other snakes, including venomous ones, and it does so without fear or hesitation. It's one of the few native predators capable of taking on and consuming juvenile pythons. Teams from conservation organizations, universities, and wildlife agencies had been breeding indigos in captivity, studying their behavior, restoring their habitats, and preparing for a careful, methodical reintroduction. What looked impulsive and reckless to the public was actually a plan decades in the making, built on solid science and careful ecological analysis. What research supported this decision? What were the potential benefits? What safeguards were in place? And here's something special. I've made a follow-up video exploring the brave animals that can make even venomous snakes run away. You'll be shocked by some of these stories. Click the video showing up on your screen right now to watch the next one. Trust me, you won't want to miss it.
The eastern indigo snake earned the nickname Emperor of the Forest. And once you understand this remarkable creature, you'll know exactly why that title fits perfectly. The eastern indigo snake is long, graceful, and utterly fearless. Growing up to 9 feet in length, it moves through tall grass and disappears into sandy burrows, with an ease that leaves even experienced wildlife biologists in awe. Its scales shimmer with deep shades of blue and black, catching sunlight in a way that makes the snake look almost iridescent, like it's been painted with liquid metal. Around its throat and chin, a soft coral or reddish tint marks it as something special, a predator with the calm confidence of royalty. Unlike many snakes that rely on venom or ambush tactics, the eastern indigo doesn't need chemical weapons to dominate its territory. This snake is non-venomous and surprisingly gentle toward humans. There are countless stories of researchers handling wild indigos without any aggression or defensive behavior. But in its own world, among other animals, it's the undisputed apex predator. It eats almost anything that moves: birds, rodents, frogs, lizards, turtle eggs, and most importantly, other snakes. Whether those snakes are venomous or not makes absolutely no difference to the indigo. The eastern indigo is immune to rattlesnake venom. It can hunt and consume venomous pit vipers without any ill effects. And unlike constrictor snakes that wrap around their prey and squeeze, the indigo uses a different technique. It simply pins its prey down with its muscular body, or grabs it and swallows it alive, completely unshaken by any struggle. The prey doesn't stand a chance against this efficient killing machine. Researchers have documented incredible feeding behaviors. One scientist discovered a single indigo snake that had eaten a pygmy rattlesnake, a tortoise hatchling, and a hognose snake all in one day. 3 different prey items from 3 different species, consumed within hours of each other. This shows that the indigo doesn't need to roar or make dramatic displays to prove its power. It simply hunts, eats, and moves on with quiet efficiency. The indigo's kingdom was once vast and impressive, from the rolling hills of Virginia down through the Carolinas, across Georgia and Alabama, through Florida and as far west as Mississippi. The eastern indigo reigned across nearly 90 million acres. It thrived in longleaf pine forests, those ancient ecosystems with their towering trees and fire-maintained understories. It lived in oak hammocks, sandy ridges, and coastal plains. Anywhere there was suitable habitat and prey, the indigo established its territory. But that kingdom began to crumble in the 20th century. Forests fell to logging operations and agricultural development. The longleaf pine ecosystem, which once covered vast stretches of the South, was reduced to just 3% of its original range. Nearly 97% of the indigo's habitat simply disappeared, converted to farms, suburbs, and commercial developments. By 1978, the situation had become so dire that the United States government listed the species as threatened under the Endangered Species Act. The emperor's reign had been reduced to scattered fragments, mostly in Florida, and small isolated pockets of Georgia.
The decline wasn't caused by nature alone. Human activities directly targeted these snakes in multiple ways. People collected them for the illegal pet trade because of their impressive size and beautiful coloration. During rattlesnake roundups, a practice that was popular for decades across the South, hunters would pump poison gas into gopher tortoise burrows to drive out rattlesnakes. The indigo snakes hiding in those same burrows for shelter never stood a chance. They died by the hundreds from the toxic fumes. During the Great Depression, when meat was scarce and people were desperate, families would dig up gopher tortoises for food. Any snakes they found in the burrows, including indigos, were killed on sight out of fear or habit. Piece by piece, the indigo's world was stripped away. Each loss of forest, each destroyed tortoise burrow, each snake killed or captured, was like pulling another brick from the foundation of an ancient fortress. By the late 20th century, fewer than 50 known breeding populations remained. The emperor was on the verge of losing its throne forever. What made this story even more tragic was how deeply the indigo's fate was tied to another species, the gopher tortoise. These remarkable reptiles dig extensive burrows that can be up to 40 feet long and 10 feet deep. These burrows provide shelter from extreme temperatures, protection from predators, and safe places to raise young. Over 350 other species depend on gopher tortoise burrows for survival, making them one of the South's most vital keystone species. The eastern indigo snake uses these burrows for nearly everything: shelter from heat and cold, protection from predators, safe places to shed their skin, and even sites for laying eggs. When gopher tortoise populations declined due to habitat loss and human persecution, the indigos followed. The two species were bound together by the threads of survival itself, each one quietly shaping an entire ecosystem that most people never noticed was disappearing. It was a cascade of extinction, one species pulling others down with it as the web of life unraveled. And yet, despite near extinction, despite decades of decline, despite having fewer breeding populations than anyone could count on both hands, the eastern indigo snake held something extraordinary. It possessed one trait that could make it far more than just a relic of the past, more than just another endangered species clinging to survival. It was a natural-born snake hunter, completely unafraid of venom, unafraid of size, and perfectly adapted to the very environment where invasive pythons were now thriving. In a region struggling against an invasion of giant constrictors, that combination of traits could mean absolutely everything. The indigo didn't need to be trained, it didn't need to be modified or enhanced, it simply needed to be given a chance to return to its ancestral home and do what millions of years of evolution had designed it to do: hunt snakes. Could it tip the balance in a war that humans had been losing for 2 decades? The answer would surprise everyone.
For nearly 20 years, the Burmese python ruled Florida's wildlands without any serious challenge. But then, one December morning, deep in the wetlands, the story took a shocking and unexpected turn. Researchers tracking a 13-foot, 52-pound male python named Loki expected nothing more than a routine data update. The snake had been fitted with a GPS tracker as part of a breeding study, and scientists believed he was closing in on a female for mating. What they discovered instead left the entire research team absolutely speechless. Loki's massive body was sprawled in the grass, but something was terribly wrong. His head, that powerful skull that had crushed countless prey animals, had been completely chewed off. But what animal in Florida could take down a 52-pound constrictor? The Everglades were beginning to fight back. As researchers reviewed their data and examined trail camera footage from across South Florida, more evidence began emerging. Alligators, those ancient reptiles that had survived for millions of years, were being spotted eating smaller pythons. Wildlife footage captured alligators grabbing juvenile pythons and performing their signature death roll, drowning the snakes before consuming them. The alligators were learning that pythons, especially younger ones, made perfectly good meals. Even more exciting, eastern indigo snakes, those same native predators that people had mocked Florida for releasing, were being documented, consuming juvenile Burmese pythons in the wild. The indigos were doing exactly what scientists had hoped. They were hunting the invaders, targeting young pythons before they could grow large enough to become serious threats. Each juvenile python eaten by an indigo was one less breeding adult in the future, one less source of 100 eggs per year. Trail cameras captured panthers stalking and killing pythons, adding them to their diet alongside their traditional prey of deer and wild hogs. Even apex mammalian predators were recognizing the pythons as potential food sources. One wildlife biologist captured the sentiment perfectly when he said, "It's a score for the home team." After 20 years of watching native species decline and disappear, after documenting one ecological disaster after another, finally there was evidence that the Everglades were fighting back. Still, we need to be realistic about what this means. Recovery doesn't happen overnight, and adaptation takes time measured in generations, not months or years. The war is far from over. The pythons still vastly outnumber their predators.
They still reproduce faster than native species can control them. They still occupy territories across thousands of square miles of wilderness. But for the first time in 20 years, there's concrete evidence that the fight isn't completely one-sided anymore. Nature is responding in the only way it knows how, through instinct, adaptation, and the slow grinding process of evolution in action. The ones that sparked so much mockery and disbelief when Florida announced their release, were they actually making a difference? The answer to that question would prove to be the most stunning part of this entire story. Into 2025, the success story continued growing. Research teams began spotting more released snakes across restored areas, and the data kept getting better. A strong 6-foot male was recorded moving confidently through the scrub, his tracking signal showing he had established a large territory. 19 other individuals from earlier release years were identified across multiple counties, proving they had survived and adapted to wild conditions. A female that had been part of the 2019 release was still active and thriving 6 years later, a remarkable survival rate for a reintroduced predator. Each new sighting demonstrated that the indigos weren't just surviving in small pockets. They were spreading out, exploring, claiming territories, and behaving exactly as wild snakes should. Places that had been silent for decades were coming alive again with the presence of this apex predator. The ecosystem was responding to their return in measurable ways. Now I want to hear from you. What surprised you most about this story? Did you know about the lungworm parasite before watching this video? Do you think Florida made the right decision releasing eastern indigo snakes? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single comment, and I love hearing different perspectives on these complex issues. If you found this deep dive into Florida's ecological crisis valuable, make sure you hit that like button. It helps other people discover this story and learn the truth behind the headlines. Subscribe to the channel if you want more in-depth explorations of environmental issues, wildlife conservation, and the fascinating science behind the headlines. Click that notification bell so you don't miss future videos. Thank you so much for watching, for staying until the end, and for caring enough about these issues to invest your time in understanding them deeply. The Florida Everglades are still in crisis, but for the first time in decades, there's real, measurable hope, and that's something worth celebrating. I'll see you in the next video.
Thanks for being with us. Leave a comment, like to show your support, and remember to hit that subscribe button for more exciting videos. See you next time.